Welcome guys to an episode with the Doomed Hell. We're making another PC part picker history video where we're going to go in depth with the very first gen Core i7 Extreme Edition CPUs. So this was a very close and dear to my heart architecture, the Nehalem architecture, because it was Intel's real first, extreme HEDT architecture that allowed for some incredible overclocking and lots of cores, lots of PCIe, some pretty technical performance optimizations over its regular architecture, and it was also a truly 2010 gaming system that you could build with this. So here's like a older view from back then. It was 2008 when they came out with the very first Nehalem CPUs. It was right at the same time as the Core 2 Quad Extreme Editions, and if we look at the gaming performance, we see that the Nehalem was completely destroying the other CPUs. Now this architecture really lasted for a very long time. They tried to keep these CPUs running for a very long time so that they could make as much as they could out of them. Coming out right around the end of 2009, the beginning of 2009, and keeping them on stock and in the shelves till 2011. So they had a lot of versions of them. At first they only had quad cores, and then they later went on to the 6-core variants, which were the Extreme Editions, coming out right around when the second gen i5, i7 generations had come out. So it's a very different time where CPUs were coming out with architectural changes every 3 years instead of the 1 or 2 that we get these days. So I just wanted to show you guys a little bit of what you could expect from these CPUs right when they came out. And the truth is that they were very, very expensive when they came out. A Core 2 Quad could cost you around $300, $400, a Phenom right around $250, and these CPUs started at $700. So they were very, very expensive for what they were, but they gave you a lot of performance. So let's look at some test cases where the i7s kind of shined over the years, and I truly think that this CPU is a 20-year CPU supreme, that reigned supreme, because they lasted for a very, very long time, and we're going to see that with the PC part picker. So just for you guys to understand, pretty much all of these came out, these posts came out around 2012, 2013. Before that, PC part picker just did not exist. So a lot of these I had to kind of delve in and find older builds that were later on kind of like written down on the PC part picker, and that was from pretty much like PC part picker addicts, people that really liked the website and kind of wanted to document all of their builds. So the very first one is what you would expect in 2009, 2010. It's a absolutely crazy, off the top, $4,000, and it is actually a $4,000 build computer. So this thing was most likely built in 2010, as he said. He probably built it right around like 2010, 2011, so mid 2010 you could expect. He liquid cooled it, custom looped it, which is incredible because back then to do that you had to go through some websites, some custom websites, some websites that nowadays people don't usually trust. Here you could see that he was running a Blu-ray drive, which was a read and write, because they were only a little bit more than your regular. But then he had also a regular a DVD drive, or this one is one of the more advanced ones, but of course pretty regular for back then. Here you see the custom. This would be IDE technology fan manipulators, and this one is an LED. I believe is a touchscreen as well, so that's very high end and high tech for back then. You see that he's running triple ViewSonic monitors. That was pretty standard back then. They're LCD, so LCD was just now getting popular, mostly because the high hertz on the CRTs were just really used for like Unreal and Quake, so a lot of people liked using these ones instead. Here you see that he has a mesh keyboard, but it is a gaming keyboard with the macros on the side and a pretty regular mouse for back then. You see where really everything the money was going into back then. So he has a nice steering wheel. It's kind of a basic one, but back then getting even a two pedal was quite nice. Big sub, big speakers for presumably playing his video games. Here he had his CD games, and that's pretty much what you'd expect for back then. Here you see that he overclocked his CPU. So he bought a regular i7-920, which is kind of a low-end CPU for back then. These were binned quad cores, and so running 4 gigahertz on one of these was pretty standard, but you could hit them to 4.2 gigahertz if you were really lucky and you really wanted to push past the voltage. Here you can kind of see the custom loop. So here you got your double regular what do you call those, tubes, and your reservoirs here. We had these funky reservoirs, but they actually didn't flow so good back then. And you can tell that this is a mid 2010 build because he's running GTX 500 series, so he's running triple 580s, presumably to get as much FPS as he could through his triple monitors. And again, three-way SLI was pretty cheap back then for running them, so it was a pretty good option to just make a lot of performance. And I like the here you have these I forget what it's called. Anyway, LED, halogen lights, which are very 2010 back then. So it's a pretty crazy build just in terms of what he's packing here. So one of the cool parts about X58 from back then was that you ran a lot of Gen 2 PCIe, full-fledged X16. So that was something that was really incredible, and it could only happen back then because the PLX chips that were invented at this point allowed it to happen. And also the very low latency of Gen 2 meant that you could run a lot of Gen 2. And you might be wondering, like, what is this thing? It kind of looks like a VRM. This is actually a cooler that you put on top of your RAM slots. So with this generation, you could run, there you go, 3 times 2 gigabyte setups. You could run up to 6 slots onto your RAM, your DDR3 RAM. And at this point, DDR3 1600, this was very high-end RAM, a very high-end RAM kit. Is it original Dominator? You see they have their little kind of heat sinks. This is really early heatsink technology. They're very proud of it. But these DDR3s, they ran very hot when you're running them, very low latency. And so when he overclocked it, let's see here. Oh, I guess he wasn't that interested in his overclocking for his system, but I guess when you're running them upwards of 1800 megahertz in CL7, I mean, it will cost you quite a lot. So if we do look back at what he has here, what is it actually? This is actually a fan heatsink combo that you could put on top of your RAM. And this has recently come back to life, especially the cool RAM water blocks that are coming out these days. But back then it was actually really, really popular, and this must have been a really cool one. I've never seen this one, to be honest, but here's this pump. There was really nothing fancy about your pumps and nothing fancy about your power supplies neither. This was just a regular thermal power, tough power supply. It's a very good one. But yeah, this was a $1,000 setup. He's running 3D surround sound, running amazing games of the time, and at the time he ran his triple 580s, but eventually he went to a 680 when that came out because that was just a much more efficient GPU, and he didn't feel like running triple SLI. So that's pretty cool. So that's our first of the builds. It was kind of a long one because again, this is very old, and none of this stuff you really want to run nowadays. But so afterwards we got a newer CPU. So right after that decade where the running these CPUs was very expensive, $4,000 builds, people started getting these builds on Craigslist and so on and so forth for much cheaper. So for instance, this guy, he lost $1,500 on Xbox, games and stuff, and he was really pissed off, and he decided to make the transition to uh, regular gaming. Now this is right around 2012, 2013, and so at that point, getting into i7-900 series was very, very good idea, because they sold a lot of them during 4 years. They sold these first gen i7s, and they were getting very, very cheap for the mass. And once they got out of shelves, people were trying to sell them left and right, trying to get into the new X79 platform, which was brand spanking new at this point. So as we see here, this guy got a really good deal off of Craigslist for everything. Just under $200 for his motherboard. The case was $90. The power supply was $120. The RAM was $100, and the CPU was just under $100. So this is a very cheap build overall. Here's his total. It was $600, not including a bunch of stuff, but this was probably close to $700 build, and in today's money that would be just under $1,000. So just under $1,000, he got a quad core, which is brand new at the time. 4.5 gigahertz would be probably his maximum overclock. He got a very nice cooler. He put on some LEDs. Here he's running Counter-Strike, which was back then very popular, 1.6. And yeah, it's a beautiful build. It was very cheap for him to build. Let's look at some more pictures here. There's his GTX 770, which he upgraded later on when those things came out, right around this time. 2 gigabyte card. It's a very good card to start off with, and he was able to play a lot of games on it, which is very nice to see, that he transitioned from his Xbox games to PC. Here we see that he ran 120 gigabyte SSDs. The previous build did not run any SSDs. He ran a Velociraptor hard drives, which were very fast hard drives. They ran close to 500 megabytes per second. 50 megabytes per second at the time, which was incredibly fast for hard drives, and that's because they were running 10,000 RPMs. So that's what he was running. This guy, he's running early Samsung 840 EVO SSDs, 120 gigabytes. So this was very early 3-bit TCL, or is it TLC? I don't remember, but 3-bit technology SSDs. And I believe the early 840s did not have any dedicated RAM. That was how they got them so cheap. So this is a $90 SSD. And then he ran your Caviar Blue hard drive. This is really the run-of-the-mill 1 terabyte. So it's pretty regular for 2013, but everything else is incredible. Very proud of this guy that he was able to kind of bounce back on his huge loss of Xbox and get into PC. And yeah, it's pretty cool. So the next build is similar. This is actually a build that was probably built right in the 2010 era, but then eventually was upgraded. And this is an analytics build. So looking at this setup, you can kind of tell this guy is a scientist. He's a researcher running triple monitors. He might be running some code, which was most likely R, statistical code. And he has this really cool i7 9th gen build. So here you have a full, let's see here. He's running 24 gigabytes of RAM, CL9 1866. So this is very good RAM. It's of AMD branded RAM. This is something you guys might not know about, but AMD at the time was trying to make some strides on reselling other parts. So they had SSD, they had their own RAM kits, they had their own power supply, and that was just one of the ways they made money back then. So he's running a stock cooler, so we could expect that he's really just running to crunch numbers. He doesn't really care about overclocking. And he's running a huge hard drive RAID setup. And he's got this rinky-dink little computer. So here we got 750 gigabyte storage, all in RAID, I assume. The SSD is probably his cache. And then the 2 terabyte is his image archive. So this would be like a RAID 6 from what I remember. he's running two GTX 660 Ti's, most likely because of CUDA, but I'm not sure how that works in the R language, how you run analytics through CUDA, but that's probably what he's doing. Here you got a read writer, Windows 7 Ultimate, gigabit Ethernet, so that's very, very common when you're running these really big builds. Sometimes you need to run them remotely, or you need to run them in pair with some of your researcher friends, so that's most likely why he got gigabit. It might just be because he wanted to play video games while he was crunching numbers, but yeah, pretty cool build. And yeah, these are Dell monitors. At the time, Dell actually had some of the better LCD monitors, just in terms of color and in actually raw resolution. You know, these were 1200p monitors. The next build is a, you know, low spec build, also kind of that range of that era. So, you know, here you got an old case, power supply and all that, but the really cool thing is that he's actually running a custom loop through the build. So this is pretty regular stuff back then when you bought 2009, 2010, and you really wanted to push your CPU. You know, running custom loop was definitely something you could do. Just like we mentioned earlier, this is a very old case. It doesn't look so good, but actually this is one of the higher end cases. And you know, another thing that a lot of people thought was pretty interesting was the or actually useful, was the computer performance for Windows. So this kind of tells you the score of your performance build, and it gave you a pretty arbitrary score. I mean, what's a 7? To be honest, I've hit like a 9 just because I had a really good gaming graphics card. I had a GTX Titan, and to be honest, it's, you know, who cares what who cares what you get on that score? I really don't know. So this one, he's running an i7-960, which is the highest end. These ones went up for $1,500 when they came out, and they dropped to $1,200 before the bigger brother 9650 and the 975 came out. That was a little later. He's got a P6X58, so the Asus P6 is the cheaper ones, the cheaper motherboards that you could get out of these, but they were really cool. Some other cool motherboards was this one, the P6T6WS Revolution. That was the really expensive one that we looked at in the first build. And this guy here, he did not specify, but I believe from the pictures, hold on, I remember I saw it. To me, this looks like a Rampage Extreme, or a, hold your horses, I believe, oh, it's a Foxconn. Okay, so this is actually a gaming Foxconn motherboard. You guys probably have never seen that kind of stuff. You know, they haven't really sold that many back or in the recent years. And then another build that I thought was pretty interesting. This is actually a Linux build, and you know it's a Linux build because he's running two graphics cards. One is a GTX and the other one is a Radeon. So this is what you could expect from later years of developers or other people that were, you know, kind of like hackers looking for the best bang for buck in their gaming experience. So this was 8 years ago, so right around 2017, 2016. And this is kind of my era. This is the era I got into these gaming PCs. So he's running a GTX hold your horses here, a GTX 550 Ti, 1 gigabyte, so that would have been great for esport and stuff like that. And then for the Linux, he's running a 450, 2 gigabyte, so that would have been great for Linux. And the point is that you run your Radeon card in the Linux OS, and then through a virtual machine, you give your GTX as a dedicated Windows card. And you could do that through like multi-PCIe, and that was perfect for X58. And another thing that you can note is that here he has a Hyper 212 Evo. So this cooler never sold with this i7, but this cooler had backwards compatibility, so that's why he was able to run it on his motherboard. And his motherboard is a Asus Sabertooth. This is a late entry in the X58 motherboards. It was kind of like a cheaper Rampage, and it kind of started the Sabertooth series, the Tough series, which was later known. And it's a pretty nice board. It's cool how it looks like a tank. It's got that kind of like desert op look to it. And yeah, another thing to note is that he had a Supernova Nex power supply, which really only sold for that kind of era. It was never sold during the original release of the 900s, and that's kind of how you know how old this thing is. So it's right around like 20. It might even be 2015 from my understanding. Then you have a Hobo build. So this was originally built in 2010 for running MMOs, and again, that was a big thing about these early gamers. They were really looking for the highest end, most stable gaming performance because they wanted to cash into playing their WoWs, Final Fantasies, EVE Online, stuff like that. Games that are very demanding, but also demand you to play for many hours. So here you see he upgraded a bunch of stuff. So he's got a 930, which is actually came out a little later than the 920, and he's got an H100. So that was probably part of his upgrade. He's got a bunch of RAM. Back then that was pretty okay RAM. This is not the best, not as good as the first RAM setup that we saw. And he's got a newer Intel SSD. This is 2014 era, 1 terabyte. And here, this is where he probably put most of his money in at this time that he built this, which was the GTX 780. Great graphics card for the time, 6 gigabyte card. They actually, I believe that Nvidia actually beat AMD at the line of hitting more than 4 gigabytes. So they started giving out their 6 gigabyte cards before AMD went with the 8 gigabytes. But between the two, the 8 gigabyte card is way better. And this is a pretty good build. So the later price, the updated price, was about $2,000 for this build. And that's pretty regular for this kind of stuff. Running an older CPU and then a newer GPU. And these builds made a lot of sense back then because, again, 2010-ish, when you're running a GTX 480, that could have cost you about $2,500. But in 2013, 2014, when you're running a GTX 780, basically the price of the GPU was the price of the rest of the build. So that made a lot of sense and why these were so popular. And then finally, this is really my era of... This is exactly what I did, really, in university. This is a McGill computer build. So this guy went to a university called McGill. This is a popular Canadian university. And he bought a original 2008 Studio XPS Dell computer. And it came with pretty much everything running. But he changed out the power supply because he wanted more performance. And put in a little graphics card, a rinky-dink one. And he was able to game on this computer. So there he is, screwing around with it, and this was his shitpost and working computer. He had to fix it up because he got it out of a garage sale, cleaned it, spray painted it, got it nice and clean, changed out the power supply because it was old, put in a new cooler, got everything running properly, got duct tape inside, which is pretty cool. Got his friend to work on some stuff, and put in a little GPU, which I'm really surprised. I thought he would go for something a little bit more gamer, but he went for 6 gigabytes of RAM. Got in a 320 gigabyte hard drive, which is very old. Oh, he actually got in a Radeon HD 5870. I couldn't tell from the gaming build, but this is a 2014 gaming build, so in 2014 the 5870 would have been just fine to start with, and then eventually he probably upgraded for like a, the average guy probably got an R9 290 right when they started going like 250. So he kept it under $300, which is an amazing deal, an amazing accomplishment is what I wanted to say. Here he says he built it in 2014. Again, makes perfect sense. These 5870s gamed on CSGO just fine. They played Dota just great. So you didn't really need much more than this, and this is a really cool build. And what I ended up doing was I got Xeon X5670. and I got a dual CPU setup. It was exactly like that. I bought it like this. It was actually one of these Z8PE. Yeah, that's the one, because I remember this kind of slot here, which made no sense, but this is actually a PCIe expansion slot. So you could add here your slot and would just add a huge PCB. It had a lot of SATA. This is a really cool motherboard. I ended up selling it for more than it was worth because these boards are really good for Bitcoin mining and stuff like that. And it just kind of looked like this. I put in a matrix case. It was dual 2120 212 EVOs, CPU coolers, and then my graphics card was an R9 290, which I unlocked it to a 290X. It was a 4 GB model because at the time they started getting expensive with the Bitcoin rise and stuff like that. It cost me right around I want to say 160. Yeah, 160 for the GPU, and then it cost me $70 for the CPUs and the motherboard, and I couldn't overclock it. That was the thing that I was kind of scared about. Was, well, I kind of want to overclock it. How am I going to do that? I sold the motherboard for more than I bought it. I bought it for 70. I sold it for 200, and then that 200 I bought a Rampage 3 Extreme. This boy, and then I overclocked. So I kept the 2 CPUs. I still have one of them here, and the 5670 I overclocked it to 4.5 gigahertz, and then later on 4.7 gigahertz. Filled in the slots. I had 24 gigs, and yeah, I just had this really nice board, and I sold it later on to a guy who ended up overclocking the crap out of his own board. And yeah, that's pretty much my story there. Pretty similar to this, but this was a little bit more low spec. He really bought this out of a garage sale and then built it up from there. But yeah. Anyhow, guys, we're almost at 30 minutes in this video. Hope you guys enjoyed this content, and I'll definitely be making more of it. Have a great day.